Capital Queers, Alex Reynolds Mystery. Book 3. Author, Fred Hunter. Publisher, St. Martin's Press, New York, 1999. Narrator, Eric Aust. Chapter 6. At first I thought that just maybe these were the remnants of some other dolls, although I didn't know how that could be possible. I looked around the room, carefully trying to avert my eyes from the corpse of my friend, which wasn't entirely possible. The Raggedy Ann doll had been shredded and stained with blood, and was lying a few inches from Ryan's outstretched fingers. I stepped carefully between the shards of broken china, tensing every time. I heard an errant crunch beneath my shoes. After a couple of minutes, I saw something I recognized. I reached down and picked it up. It was the scalp of Dolly Madison. I was so stunned I barely noticed the lab technician who shepherded me out of the room. "It's not possible," I said, stumbling on the edge of the rug in the dining room, still holding the piece of ceramic. "I'd better get him a glass of water," said Peter. "Is that all right?" Frank nodded to him. I slumped back onto the couch. "We cleaned it all up. Yesterday, Mother and I. We got rid of all of them." "You threw them all away?" said Billings sharply. "Yes, we got rid of them all. If I remember correctly, you weren't interested in them, and we were giving the okay to come in here and clean up." "Maybe they had more dolls somewhere else," said Peter as he returned with the water. He handed me the glass, and I took a drink from it. "No," I said when I came up for air. "Look, this is a piece that was there when we cleaned." "Are you sure?" said Frank. "Of course I'm sure. Don't you think I'd recognize Dolly Madison's hair?" Frank let that one go by. "What'd you do with the ones you threw away?" "We bagged them and put them out back in the garbage." "Well, that would explain the garbage bag." "What?" "There is a soiled garbage bag in there. It would appear that somebody brought them back into the house." "But why in the hell would they do that?" said Peter. "That's something we'll have to find out," said Frank. Then he turned to Billings and added, "Make sure you have all that debris swept up and delivered to the lab. We have to have that stuff gone over with a fine-tooth comb." "Yes, sir," replied Billings in a deferential tone that I'm sure caused him some pain. He turned on his heel and headed back to the doll room. Frank sat down in the chair that Billings had vacated earlier. He looked down at the floor, then up at us. "Are you all sure the two of you don't have any idea who did this?" I blinked at him. "Of course we're sure." "You have no idea who would want to kill these two guys?" "None at all," said Peter, whose expression was a match for mine. "Your mother told me on the phone yesterday that Ryan was staying with you." "Yeah." "Did he give you any indication, any hint, that he might have known who killed his partner?" "None at all," I said, shaking my head so vigorously my brain rattled. "He was as shocked as we were." "More so," Peter added. "He really didn't have a clue," I explained. "You've got to understand that Mason was as easygoing as they come. I don't think he had any enemies. Except..." "What?" said Frank. "Oh, nothing," I replied with a wave of my hand. "Just that I said something like that to Ryan, and he said that there was people that didn't like Mason." "But just like anybody else," Peter added quickly. "Not anyone that disliked him enough to kill him." Frank thought about this for a moment, rubbing the corners of his mouth and his index finger and thumb. He looked as if he didn't quite believe us. "So, he didn't say or do anything out of the ordinary while he stayed with you. Only that he decided to come back here sooner than Mother thought he should. We were a little surprised by that, but Mother thought he was just anxious to try to get back to something like normal." Frank continued to eye me with that same doubtful look. Finally, he released a heavy sigh and said, "Look, guys, I know the two of you. I've known you for a long time, and I think that, with rare exceptions, you're pretty trustworthy." The rare exception he was referring to was the first CIA case that we'd fallen into. We were put in the unfortunate position of having to deceive Frank about what was going on until the last minute, when we'd enlisted his aid. He'd assured us at the time that he understood why we'd had to keep him in the dark, but the fact that he mentioned it now proved to me that it had bothered him nonetheless. "And," said Peter. "Well, I want to be sure that you're being straight with me," he said, then amended quickly. "I mean that you're telling me everything you know about this." I could feel the corners of my mouth drooping. I widened my eyes, trying to look as innocent and perplexed as I felt, and said, "Frank, we have no idea who's done this, or why." He let a beat go by before saying, "Because you know it wouldn't be the first time that you were involved in investigating something that included murder without my knowledge." "Frank," he raised his palm to silence me, "but you have to understand that murder's murder, and when it happens in my area, my people have to investigate no matter what you or anyone else is doing, because if you know anything about this, no matter how I feel about you or your mother, I may not be able to hold Billings back in pursuing it." I wouldn't do it anyway. I searched his face and could sense something of a smile behind his eyes. He was paying us back for keeping him in the dark on our first case, and possibly for having anything to do with the CIA, since law enforcement officers are extremely proprietary about their little plots of ground. By playing a barely masked game of good cop, bad cop with us, my only consolation was that I was sure Billings didn't know he was in the game. But there was something more in what Frank was proposing. I think he really did believe that we were involved in another, well, caper, for lack of a better word, that we weren't letting him in on. I would have been insulted that he didn't think I was telling him the truth, if only I hadn't lied to him so often. I sighed deeply and said, "We don't have any idea what's going on here. This is not a case. This doesn't have anything to do with the CIA or any part of the government. For Christ's sake, don't you think we want you to find out who killed our friends? If we knew anything that would help you do that, we'd tell you." "All right," he said with a hint of reluctance. Apparently, he didn't want to let go of his doubts too quickly. "I believe you." There was a pause before he added, "But Alex, one thing you should know. When I checked the bedroom, I found a suitcase on the bed, half packed, with a pile of clothes next to it." "What?" "It looks like your friend was planning to run." I was speechless for a minute, realizing that what the implications of Ryan's departure would have meant to the police. Then I said, "If he was going to run, it was because he was in fear of his life." Frank gave a nod. "Given what's happened to him, I'd say he had every reason to be." On the way home, I felt stunned and dazed. Billings and company had kept us so busy that I don't think it hit me until we were out of there that our friends had both been killed. My legs suddenly felt like rubber, and I was afraid they were going to go out from under me. I grabbed Peter's shoulder, and he supported me. "What is it?" "I don't know. I guess I just realized that they're dead," I said. "I know what you mean." Peter wrapped his arms around me and held me for a few minutes. I took some deep breaths and then was ready to go on. He kept my hand in his, and it was one of those moments where in weakness I could feel myself drawing strength from my friend. Lover and companion in life, energy seemed to pulsate from his hand into mine. "God," I said when I finally detached myself. "I can't believe that he was going to run. He must have known why Mason was killed." "Most likely. If he'd only told us what he knew," I said, tears starting to well up again. "Maybe we could have helped him." "Alex," Peter said soberly, Do you think this could have anything to do with Agent Nelson?" "Agent Lawrence Nelson is our supervisor on the occasional bits of work we do for the CIA." "What?" I exclaimed, stopping in my tracks. "How could it have anything to do with the CIA?" He shrugged. "Have you ever noticed that whenever someone gets killed around us, Agent Nelson manages to pop up?" I put my hands on my lips. "I have a better question. Have you ever noticed how many people get killed around us? Christ, I'm beginning to feel like Jessica Fletcher. Pretty soon we won't have any friends left." Peter pursed his lips. His eyes were smiling. "You mean because they'll be afraid to be around us, or because there won't be any left?" "Take your pick," I said, and we both laughed uneasily. It was a little too close to the realm of possibility for comfort. "No," I said as we resumed walking. "I would say if there's anything we can be sure about on this mess is that for once it doesn't have anything to do with the government." said Peter. Not much consolation, is it? We went along in silence for a couple of minutes. Then Peter said, "There's one thing, though, sweetheart." "What?" "Well, I think you forgot about it when Frank was talking to us, but, we have that bag of dolls under the basement stairs." "Oh, my God, that's right," I said, smacking my forehead. "But that doesn't matter. Even if I'd remembered, I don't think I would have told them about it." "Why? They're interested in the dolls now." "I know, but despite what I told them, I'm too pissed off to help them, and besides, those dolls are all that's left of Mason's collection, and I'll be damned if I'll turn them over to those fat-handed idiots to paw over and pulverize." "How loquacious of you, lover," said Peter with a slight smile. "Well, you knew about the dolls. Why didn't you tell them about them?" "I haven't gone all sentimental over them," he said quietly, "but I'm like you. I didn't want that Billings character manhandling Mason's prized possessions. Besides, Mason left them to you, and they're yours to dispose of, as you see fit." I stopped again quite suddenly, grabbed Peter by the arm, and spun him around to face me. I shoved my arms through his, drawing him against my chest, and kissed him so hard I could almost feel myself draining into him. Our lips slid apart, and we embraced. "Well, what was that for?" Peter whispered into my ear. "I was just remembering how Ryan looked." "It'll be hard to forget." "No, I mean yesterday when I talked to him in the guest room. He looked so lost. He looked like he couldn't go on without Mason." "Oh," said Peter, tightening his arms around me. "I don't know what I'd do without you, and I don't want to find out. God, I love you." We held the embrace for a couple of minutes. Then I pushed him gently to the arm's length, wiggled my right index finger at him, and said, "Don't you ever start collecting dolls. Look at what it leads to." When we arrived home, I opened the front door and was surprised by two heads swiveling in my direction from the couch in the living room. The two men sat across from Mother. They were dressed in identical gray suits, though one had dark blonde hair and the other light brown. They each had it combed back into submission. Both had very serious eyes and flat, unsmiling mouths. They looked so much alike they could have been brothers, but as they rose to greet me, I realized this impression was more cultivated than natural. One was shorter than the other. They shared the mannerisms of men who came from the same school rather than the same womb. "Mr. Hamilton and Mr. Dunn," said Mother by way of introduction. Hamilton, the taller one, stretched out his hand to me, and as I shook it, I said, "Selling the watchtower?" "No," he replied with a singular lack of humor. He slipped a folder from his pocket and flashed it at me. "State Department." "State Department? What are—" "Darling," said Mother, judiciously cutting me off, "I was just about to make us some tea. Would you like to help me?" "Tea won't be necessary, Mrs. Reynolds. We don't need anything, and hopefully we won't be staying long," Hamilton said quickly. The way his eyes shifted to one side made it seem as if he thought we were trying to pull something. "It's no trouble at all," Mother replied airily as she headed for the kitchen. "I was just about to make some for my boys. Entertain them, will you, Peter?" "You never should have mentioned Nelson," I whispered to Peter before following Mother. Mother quickly busied herself with making the tea as if it was a necessary annoyance. "Pull some biscuits out of that jar and put them on a plate," she commanded. "We don't have much time." As I complied, I said, "Mother, Ryan's dead. He's been murdered, just like Mason." "I know." My eyes widened. "How's that possible?" She cocked her head in the direction of the living room. "They told me. They seem to know all about it already, and they told me the two of you were all right." "Did they tell you he was killed in the same way Mason was?" "Good God, no!" "Yeah, so we were wrong about one thing. Whatever this murderer was looking for when he killed Mason, he didn't find it because he came back. And so did the dolls." "What?" she said incredulously. "I'll tell you about it later." Mother thought for a minute, then made a tisky noise. "I don't like these people showing up like this, especially with them knowing about Ryan almost before it happened. I mean, they say they're with the State Department. You have some doubt? Don't you think if they wanted to contact us, they'd do it through Larry Nelson?" "Why? The State Department isn't the CIA, so they probably don't even know we're with this agency." You know from our rather lurid past experience that the right hand doesn't know what the left hand is doing in our government." "I suppose that's true," said Mother, her face relaxing just a bit. "What does the State Department do anyway?" "How on earth should I know?" "You're an American, aren't you?" "Good Lord, what does that have to do with anything? You had to learn more about America than I did when you got your citizenship." "I suppose." "Did you tell them we're with the CIA?" I asked. "Of course not," Mother replied indignantly. "I didn't know. I still don't know what they are here for. So I kept my mouth shut. When they started asking questions, I realized they didn't know who we were." "Asking questions?" I said, putting the cookie jar back on the counter. "About what?" Mother sighed. "I'm not quite sure, but it has something to do with Mason. Since all they've done so far is ask about him, I have a feeling Mason was in some sort of trouble." "Good guess, seeing as how he's been killed." She grimaced at me, but chose to go on without comment. "But they got here just before you did, so your guess is as good as mine." The kettle had begun to whistle. Mother lifted it from the stove and poured it into the ceramic pot that sat on our serving tray, surrounded by matching mugs. I was always glad that Mother didn't go for the typical British teacups, but instead insisted on mugs for a proper lot of tea. "I suppose we'll find out what they want," she said as she swept through the kitchen door. I followed closely with the plate of cookies and laid them on the coffee table in front of the G-men. "Here we go," said Mother. "Nice and hot. Now, you were saying?" Mother poured out as the conversation continued. Neither of the agents took any interest in the mugs placed before them. In fact, they took too little interest in the mugs, as if they didn't want to touch anything. Hamilton looked at Mother for a split second as if he would have liked to chastise her for scurrying out of the room, and cleared his throat. "We understand that the three of you were familiar with Mason Lapierre. He was a friend of ours, if that's what you mean." I didn't mean to sound quite so snappish, but government agents have a tendency to phrase things in a way that makes the simplest statement sound like an accusation. "Exactly how did you come to understand that?" Peter asked. Hamilton flashed an enigmatic smile as he answered, which led me to believe he was anxious for us to understand he didn't need to answer our questions. In checking into Mr. Lapierre's background, we found that he used you, Mr. Reynolds, as a reference on some employment applications. "I didn't know Mason had ever applied for work with the government," I said. "I didn't say he had," Hamilton replied. Mother, Peter, and I glanced at each other. The gravity of this statement sunk in. "Why would you be looking into Mason's background, Mr. Hamilton?" said Peter with an edge in his voice. "Just for sport." "And what possible difference could his background mean now?" asked Mother. "He's dead, and so his husband." Hamilton sat back as Mr. Dunn, who had so far been his silent partner, leaned forward. The move looked choreographed. "As to looking into his background, we were interested in finding out what kind of American he was. "What kind of an American?" I said. "He was a gay American." Dunn looked at me as if I needed to be spanked. "We know that. Perhaps I should have been more clear. I meant we wanted to know whether or not he was a patriot." "I don't know what you mean by that," said Peter hotly. "From the way the government treats us, you would think we weren't citizens. How patriotic can you be to that?" "Peter," said Mother quietly. She sounded not as if she was warning him, but as if she didn't feel this was the time or place. She also sounded as if she agreed with him. Mother can put an awful lot of meaning into one word. "Mason loved this country," I said firmly, "no matter how the country may have felt about him. Now, what's this all about? Mason's dead, I would think. You can leave him alone now." Dunn sat back just as Hamilton lurched forward. They were beginning to remind me of a pair of scissors. "His death and the death of his partner are what brings us to you. It's believed that on Mr. Lapierre's recent trip to the nation's capital—" "You know about that?" I cut in incredulously. Hamilton looked at me a second before answering. "Circumstances have brought this to our attention, yes." "What circumstances?" "If you please," said Hamilton with marked patience. "It's believed that on Mr. Lapierre's recent trip to the nation's capital, he may have come into possession of something of importance to the government." I could feel the color drain from my face. "Like what?" I hope you're not going to say microfilm. I tried to sound sarcastic, though inwardly I was really hoping it wasn't microfilm, because we'd once gotten involved in something like that and it nearly cost us our lives. Nothing quite so prosaic, I'm afraid, said Hamilton with an indulgent smile. Just an object. Well, what was it? Mother asked. She was beginning to lose her patience with these guys. Exactly what it is doesn't matter, he replied flatly. What we want to know is whether or not Mr. Lapierre said anything to you about having such an object, or what he might have done with it. Well now, there's a difficulty, I said, because without knowing what you're looking for, how are we supposed to know whether or not Mason mentioned it? You know. Out of the corner of my eye, I could see Mother's eyebrows slide upward. Dunn leaned forward, but this time Hamilton stayed in place. I wonder if I had made him forget his steps. Can we take it that you're unwilling to cooperate? You can take no such thing, said Mother indignantly. We have cooperated with the government on several occasions. The only thing you can take is that we don't know what you're talking about. Hamilton said, Mr. Lapierre never mentioned finding or having anything unusual? Nothing, I replied with finality. Why didn't you ask Mason about this before he got killed? Dunn made a little noise in his throat as if he was clearing it, and only halfway. Unfortunately, we didn't know about Mr. Lapierre until it was too late. And by the time we found out about him, he and his friend had been murdered. You found that out rather quickly, didn't you? Said Mother. Yes, Hamilton replied without explanation. Well, whatever it is you're looking for must be over in their apartment. Dunn cleared the rest of his throat. We have reason to believe that it wasn't in their possession when they were murdered. Mother's eyebrows merged with her hairline. Peter looked extremely displeased, and I was just confused. Suddenly Peter said, Is that why you're here? You think we have whatever it is you're looking for? Hamilton's smile was becoming downright scary. You were friends of theirs. We thought it might be a possibility. I hate to disappoint you, said Mother, but if they didn't discuss it with us, they surely didn't give it to us, whatever it may be. The agents looked each of us in the eye in turn, then rose as one. We thank you for your cooperation, said Hamilton, drawing out the last word significantly. He took a business card from his wallet and handed it to Mother. If you happen to remember anything, would you please give us a call? I glanced at the card over Mother's shoulder. It was a number in Washington, D.C. I assure you, Mr. Hamilton, that we won't be calling because we have nothing to remember. As you say, Hamilton said cryptically. With that, he and his partner left. Mother closed the door behind them, wheeled around, and looked me straight in the eye. All right, what have you done? I glanced from her to Peter and back again. Me? I haven't done anything. What are you talking about? Oh, I don't know, darling, she said, dripping with irony. But when the State Department ends up in our living room, I just can't help thinking that you have something to do with it. How can you say that? She pursed her lips at me as she continued counting the events on her fingers. You go to a bar and we end up in the middle of the CIA. You watch a dirty movie and we end up at... All right, I said. There's no need to dredge up the past. My God, first the police, then the State Department, and now you. I don't know any more about this than you do. She folded her arms across her breast and raised her right eyebrow at me. I swear, I added defensively. Really, Jean, he's telling the truth, said Peter. We're in the dark, for the most part. Mother turned her questioning gaze on him. Well, we know a little more than the police, and I think we know that what the State Department didn't want to tell us. And what would that be? It wasn't something to do with the dolls, I said. Remember when we were cleaning up yesterday, we were talking about how the murder might have had something to do with the dolls? Peter nodded. Now the police are interested in them. Yes, I said. It's what I started to tell you in the kitchen. The dolls came back. She expelled a hot breath. What kind of daft nonsense is that? It's true. We found Ryan lying there dead in the doll room, and the remains of the dolls were scattered all around. But we threw them out. Somebody brought them back in, apparently the murderer. Mother's expression softened into a confused daze. She put her fingers to her temples and dropped down onto the couch. Oh, Lord, I don't believe it. It's true, Jean, said Peter. They were all there, the ones that had been destroyed before, garbage bag and all. But that doesn't make any sense. I know, I said, nodding my head. No, I mean that the murderer would have brought them back in the house. First of all, he or she wouldn't have known where they were. Why on earth would they have looked out back in the garbage? And second, even if they found them there, why would they bring them in the house? Why not just take them away? No, I think it's much more likely that Ryan fetched them back into the house. Why would he do that? I said. Probably because he knew what it was Mason discovered in one of them, Peter explained. You know Mason never would have kept it a secret from Ryan. Ryan must have wanted to look for it himself. And the killer returned? I said, completing the thought. Exactly, said Mother. But why? I mean, the first time they were there, if they hadn't found what they were looking for, and they'd killed Mason and had him out of the way, why didn't they just go on looking for whatever it is? Why didn't they break up the rest of the dolls or take them away? After she said this, we fell silent for a moment. Muffin chose the moment to come trundling down the stairs. When he saw Mother was seated, he made a beeline for her, leapt up on the couch, and sat down beside her. She petted his head for a moment, then suddenly Mother's eyes widened and she rose from the couch. Muffin sat up expectantly. The rest of the dolls! Oh, my Lord! We have the rest of the dolls! I know that. But don't you see what danger we're in? We've got to get rid of them. No, I said, trying to sound more calm than I felt. We've got to find what is hidden in one of them. Alex, those fellows from the State Department wanted to know if Mason had given you anything. You can't withhold evidence from them. Peter shrugged. Gene, we've withheld evidence from the CIA and the FBI. What's one more department? I'm not withholding from the feds, I protested. I'm withholding it from the police. Mother blinked at me. There's a difference. Difference or not, I'll not have those things here with people getting killed over them. We have to turn them over to somebody. I won't give them to the police, not after the way they treated us. Frank's not the one I'm worried about, even though I wasn't exactly pleased with him tonight either. He thinks we're holding out on him. Well, you are. Not intentionally. When they were questioning us, I just didn't think about the dolls, but either way, right now I'm in no mood to give them to them. Well then, the State Department. I'm not turning them over to strangers either. What I'm going to do is, tomorrow morning I'm going to call Nelson and make sure there really is an investigation going on. If it's a State Department matter, he may not know about it, said Peter. But he'll be able to find out about it, and he can check up on those 2 junior G-men that were just here. I'd hate to think I'm getting paranoid, but I'm not going to accept that they work for the State Department just because they say so. If Nelson finds out they're all right, then we'll hand the dolls over. Assuming, of course, that we can trust Nelson, said Peter, in the tone people use when they're discussing the low quality of cafeteria food. More out of a matter of principle than belief. But first, I think we should do a little investigating on our own, starting with the dolls. Mother shrugged and looked down at the dog. The left corner of her mouth went down as if she was taking pity on the poor animal. And you, little darling, it looks like you're our doggy now. Then there's one thing we have to do before we do anything else, I said. What's that? Change his name. Gay Mysteries audiobooks. I think it is easy to hate a label, but a face humanizes the word. So this effort is twofold. To offer comfort to those like myself that your world didn't end because you don't fit into the view of acceptable society on both sides. And in hopes of helping those with family that are LGBTQ, that it doesn't mean we are aliens from the child they once knew. Reassure them so they can maybe be supportive at the same time, being true to their values.